The curtain has quietly fallen on a true icon of television and stage, Richard Chamberlain, who passed away on March 29th at the age of 90, in the serene stillness of his home. There was no grand farewell, no sweeping public memorial, no emotional statements from family or representatives. Just a short, almost whispered announcement from his closest companion in later life. A hushed exit, fitting for a man who mastered the art of privacy. While a few major news outlets paid their respects, much of the younger generation barely recognized the name, perhaps recalling only fleeting clips on YouTube, echoes from a time when Chamberlain was the king of American television. For those who had witnessed his era, he was not just a star, he was a symbol. Elegant, unshaken, the embodiment of Hollywood grace. He stayed above scandal, untouched by the industry's chaos, and chose solitude over spectacle. But in a twist worthy of a screenplay, the full complexity of Chamberlain's story began to emerge only after his death. A will, signed in November 2023, just months before he passed, surfaced and sent shockwaves through both legal and fan circles. Nearly 40 pages long, the meticulously crafted document revealed a version of Chamberlain that few had ever known. One that challenged assumptions and stunned surviving relatives. Instead of distributing his nearly $20 million estate among family, Chamberlain's final wishes pointed in an unexpected direction. The bulk of his fortune, from lucrative royalties to long-held investments, was left not to blood relatives, but to a relatively obscure nonprofit, the Pacific Light Foundation, an Oahu-based group dedicated to youth arts education and independent theater. For over a decade, Chamberlain had quietly supported the organization, never attaching his name, never seeking credit. Another poignant revelation came with the inclusion of Martin Rabbit, Chamberlain's former partner, who hadn't lived with him since 2010. In the will, Rabbit was described as someone I once loved deeply and always cherish. He was left a villa in Maui, joint investment accounts dating back to before 1995, and an undisclosed cash sum, gifts marked as deeply personal and beyond legal dispute. The language throughout the will was firm and unambiguous, deliberate in tone, insulated from contest. And as Chamberlain's extended family remained publicly silent, intrigue around the story only deepened. Sources say that contact between him and his relatives had been minimal for years. One niece, a former schoolteacher, spoke candidly in an interview. "We tried many times to reconnect, but Uncle Richard always kept his distance," she said. "He lived life on his own terms, and I think this reflects exactly that." As media attention swelled, the public began to ask, was this Chamberlain's quiet act of rebellion, or simply the last word of a man who knew what and who mattered to him in the end? Legal experts confirmed the will's clarity and intentionality, noting no sign of coercion or dispute. His longtime estate attorney echoed this, calling it a document built on total autonomy and care. Online, reactions were split. Many praised Chamberlain for directing his legacy as he saw fit, especially in light of distant family ties. Others expressed sadness at the thought of relatives being so thoroughly excluded. Yet amid the noise, a shared realization took hold. This will wasn't just paperwork, it was a parting message. It was the final act of a man who spent a lifetime cultivating elegance, guarding his truth, and making difficult, unseen choices. For someone once celebrated as the epitome of American masculinity, it was a quiet, yet profoundly powerful goodbye. As of now, no legal challenges have been filed. For many of Richard Chamberlain's relatives, the greatest loss wasn't measured in dollars, it was emotional. His will didn't just allocate assets, it seemed to confirm a fear they'd long carried, that he had left them behind years ago, not just in life, but in love. When the legal haze began to lift, the conversation turned from estate planning to something much deeper. Why would a star who once lit up millions of screens choose such seclusion and leave his family with nothing? The answer, many believe, lies in the lifelong duality Chamberlain navigated. Torn between the brilliant lights of fame and the long shadows of hidden truth, he lived a divided life. A man celebrated by millions, yet quietly carrying the burden of secrets too heavy for his time. At his peak, Chamberlain wasn't just famous, he was the gold standard. With his chiseled looks, calming voice, and immaculately polished presence, he wasn't just cast as heroes, he defined them. His breakout role as Dr. Kildare in the 1960s didn't just make him a household name, it rewrote the template for the male TV protagonist. Dr. Kildare was more than a character, it became cultural canon. Stoic, noble, and emotionally controlled, Chamberlain's portrayal shaped generations of expectations for what a leading man should be. That role launched a career that spanned decades, with landmark performances in Centennial, 1978, Shogun, 1980, and The Thorn Birds, 1983. In each role, he embodied a man of quiet intensity, wounded but unwavering, always dignified. But even as the public saw strength, Chamberlain was fighting a private war of his own. Behind the facade of control was a truth he didn't dare share, not even with those closest to him. At the height of his fame, the idea of coming out as gay felt like career suicide. Hollywood, then rigid in its ideals of masculinity, left little room for authenticity. Chamberlain later called it living inside a perfect shell. Everything was curated: his image, his speech, his romantic persona. He lived a life of concealment, not out of shame, but survival. Even love had to remain a secret. In the 1980s, he quietly moved to Hawaii with Martin Rabbit, a fellow actor and screenwriter. Their partnership, though deeply committed and collaborative, remained invisible to the public. Martin wasn't just a partner. He was a creative ally, helping Chamberlain navigate the pressures of fame and maintain his public image. Their relationship remained in the shadows until 2003, when Chamberlain released his memoir, Shattered Love. In it, he acknowledged the life he had kept hidden, one shaped not just by love, but by fear. "I loved Martin. I knew that clearly early on," he wrote, "but I also knew that if I admitted it, everything could fall apart." The revelation, though brave, landed softly. By then, Chamberlain was no longer a central Hollywood figure, and society had shifted. But for him, it was a moment of personal reckoning. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said in an interview, "because I've nearly lived my whole life." It wasn't a call to activism, nor a plea for sympathy. Chamberlain wasn't interested in becoming a symbol or spokesperson. He simply wanted to be honest, on his terms. After a few modest roles in the 2000s, he quietly stepped out of the spotlight. His relationship with Martin ended in 2010, but the bond they shared, nearly 3 decades deep, never truly faded. While they parted ways, they remained connected in the quiet, enduring way that only longtime companions understand. From that point on, Chamberlain lived a life defined not by headlines, but harmony. He settled into a coastal home in Hawaii, far from the noise of celebrity. His days were filled with books, piano music, and peaceful solitude. Neighbors described him as warm, if reserved. Someone who gave generously, but without ever seeking praise. To those who followed his career, it became clear. Chamberlain's life had always been split into 2 eras. One was polished and public, bound by the expectations of fame. The other, far quieter, was more real, one of freedom, self-reflection, and personal truth. In that context, his will no longer seemed like a mystery. It was a reflection of a man who had always valued control, clarity, and a fiercely guarded inner world. Though he stepped away from the camera, he never abandoned the arts. Quietly and without credit, Chamberlain supported Oahu's cultural scene, donating to theaters, libraries, and artist programs. He gravitated to a small art school focused on acting and playwriting. He didn't teach classes, but he mentored quietly, often guiding students who needed it most. Only after his passing did his quiet legacy come into focus. For over 15 years, Chamberlain had been the Pacific Light Foundation's primary benefactor, his generosity helping it grow into a regional powerhouse that now serves over 300 students a year. His fingerprints were everywhere, even if his name rarely was. Though he lived alone, Chamberlain was never truly isolated. He kept close ties with a tight circle of friends and found comfort in music, often playing Chopin or Debussy for hours. His piano became a kind of sanctuary, a place where he could simply be. His life choices, no marriage, no children, and limited family contact, painted a portrait of independence. When Shattered Love was released, many family ties had already frayed. His will, and the way it was structured, made sense in light of everything. A final act of autonomy from a man who had spent a lifetime crafting his own peace. Richard Chamberlain's legacy isn't just about the roles he played, but the life he lived when no one was watching. A life of privacy, quiet strength, and authenticity. He reminds us that influence doesn't require the spotlight, and that sometimes the loudest truths are the ones spoken in silence. If this story made you see things differently, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a moment from our channel. Drop a comment below. We want to hear your take. Because in the world of fame, there's always more than meets the spotlight.